Well, welcome. Tonight, we're going to do a short show because our senator is in demand. So he found some time to come down and talk to us. There's some really good things going on. If there is somebody who doesn't know you, why don't we start with an introduction?
Sure, thanks. I'm Ryan Fattman. I have the honor and privilege of serving in the Massachusetts State Senate, and I've been doing that now for 5 years, going on 6 in 2020, and thoroughly enjoy it.
Well, you've done a lot for us, and we appreciate it.
That's the point. You got to do that as part of your job. It's public service, and you know I'm honored to do it. It's a lot of fun for me. Keeps me busy. As I said tonight when I came in, hey, do you think I can sneak out of here a little bit earlier than I usually do because somebody asked me to go to an event tonight? But I really enjoy it, and it's keeping me busy.
I still don't understand how you can. Is it 13 towns?
14 towns.
14.
Yeah, 13 and a half, depending on how you count. But Northbridge, I have half of it, the southern part. Oh, yeah. But I got the whole thing.
I was going to say, I wanted to give away a street in Milford. When I found out that Bellingham gets 2 reps, because they gave away 1 street or something. It's like, can't we give away a street and that way we'd have 2 reps? Well,
sometimes it can be a little bit confusing and it dilutes really. Somebody emails you and they're not the right person, and it can be a little bit confusing for people, but it works out.
We read a lot about education.
Yeah.
That maybe we're getting some money?
Yeah, so I think when you look at sort of the last 10 months of what's been going on in the state, we got sworn in on January 6th this year, and everybody recognized the 3 major issues of the legislative session the next 2 years. Number 1, education. Number 2, transportation. Number 3, healthcare. And sort of all of those things have interfaced with one another in some form or fashion, but the first major topic was taken up last Thursday. The Senate took on the Student Opportunity Act, and that was a $1.2 billion rewrite of the education funding formula in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. For people who are unaware, in 1993, the Commonwealth passed the first ever education reform, which created a formula that basically stipulated that funding would be based on enrollment and that it would impact certain districts differently depending on demographics, healthcare, education, transportation, all this kind of stuff. If you're a regional school district, it affects you a little bit differently than if you're just, a Milford-based home district. And, that was really good. There was some things that it put into place. It certainly created the funding formula so that cities and towns across the Commonwealth could expect a certain amount of funding from the state on an annual basis with predictability. They also established metrics for, trying to measure progress. We've done that very well. The MCAS was sort of the mode to do that through. And when you look at the results over 20 years, there's several things that stick out. Number 1, we became number 1 in education, K through 12 in the entire country. Not one state surpasses us in math, in literacy, in science, and those are all good things. And when you look at us relative to the rest of the world, I'm pretty sure we ranked number 1 when it came to math and science relative to our peers.
This is Massachusetts.
This is Massachusetts, and number 4 in English and literature and literacy. So that's pretty amazing stuff. Now, of course, you can always do better. There's always debates about, well, what's fair when it comes to who's getting their portion of the pie. And another thing that I think we haven't done so well is, while we take, sort of average students and put them into a great system and produce a good product, one of the things we don't do very well in our state is take exceptional students and make them even better. There's not a lot of programs for exceptional students as there are in some other states. So this is what we took up on Thursday. I voted for it. There's some pros. I think there's some cons. In my opinion, the pros outweighed the cons. My district, as I said, 14 towns, all of them are treated differently. If you were to say there's, winners and those who won but not that much.
Not as much?
Not as much as others. I would put Milford in the winner category. I think Milford did really well. Just to run down the numbers, so it's an implementation in the change in the formula over 7 years. If things were remaining the same from FY20 until FY27, that 7-year time period, implemented this year till the 27 year, you would see an additional $6.5 million with the regular formula. This new formula will give another $8 million, and that's just in Chapter 70 funding, so about $1.5 million more dollars. But what's a little bit different is, unlike the broken promises of the past with the 1993 formula, where we said, oh, well, we'll make sure we reimburse districts for charter school students that leave, which we've never done. We've come close sometimes, but we've never fully funded that. We fully fund that in this bill. For the town of Milford, that means $282,000, about $255
Wow.
every single year over the next 7 years. That's to make up for the students that have left to some of the 3 area charter schools. So you got one in Franklin, you have one in Marlborough, and you have one in Framingham that pulls students. I believe that those are the only 3 local ones that
Yeah, they
impact.
tried putting one in Milford, but that went away.
They did, yes. That recently, the Commissioner of Education just said that it wasn't a thorough enough application. I think it would have taken about 279 students out of the school system. But that's one major problem that we have fixed. The second thing is we've never fully funded the circuit breaker, which reimburses for special education costs. And we've always had towns be out on their own, operating autonomously with the transportation costs. And we've changed that. So now we've fully funded the circuit breaker, that it's 100% funded, which means 75.
Seriously?
Yep. And we've added the transportation costs to that.
That's fantastic.
And that will be implemented over the course of 4 years and then fully funded every year thereafter. Part of this was trying to figure out the fiscally responsible way to implement this. $1.2 billion is a significant amount of money. If you add inflation into that, it really is about $2.2 billion. So for the first year, when you talk about fully funding circuit breaker and for special education and for the transportation costs for Milford, you're looking at, if it was implemented fully, $555,000. So you take a fourth of that, then half of that, then 75% of that, then 100% of that, and then 100%, 100%, 100% moving forward in perpetuity. That's a significant amount of money. When I added it all up over the course of 7 total years, you're talking about multi-millions of dollars in additional funding for the Milford Public School. Now, I said that there are, sort of pros to the bill and there were cons. One of the cons that I was disappointed that did not exist, that the governor had filed back when we started the legislative session in January, February, was accountability measures. We've done a great job making sure our test scores are good, making sure we have adequate funding, which we just tried to make better. But what we haven't done is had a lot of accountability. In the last 20 plus years, 30 years of this funding formula, there's been 3 or 4 schools that have been taken over by the state that have been underperforming. And one of those is Lawrence, one of those is Holyoke, and one is in my district, Southbridge. And there was another one that wasn't really taken over, but came close. And if you look at, a lot of people say, well, money is really important in education. But I would suggest that money's not everything. So Boston is one of those school districts that have been struggling for quite some time, at least 10 years. We say level 5 is the worst when you rank schools 1 to 5. In 5 is going into receivership. Well, Boston has been level 4. In my district, Oxford has been level 3, level 4. And there's not been a lot of accountability to try to turn those schools around because towns operate so autonomously. And it takes an act of the Commissioner of Education and the Board of Education to basically take over a school district, disband the school committee, disband the union, the teachers union, go in and have basically complete hiring authority. Well, this happened in Southbridge in May 2015, but the real success so far, because it's been several years, is Lawrence. What happened in Lawrence, actually the receiver was now the Commissioner of Education, Commissioner Riley, and he went in there and over the course of about 5 years really turned that school district around. And they spend about $18,000 per pupil
Wow.
in aid, which is significant. Most of that is paid for by the state, but they have increased their test scores significantly on every measure. They have a better product, and when you compare that to Boston, Boston has seen their test scores, both SAT and MCAS, decline over the course of the last 10 years, and they spend $24,000 per student. And so just, money matters, but it's not everything. And there's very similar demographics in Lawrence as there are in Boston. And you can see that accountability measures, which were implemented in Lawrence, made a lot of progress, but which were not implemented because the state didn't take over the Boston school system, which is a big debate on Beacon Hill whether or not that would happen. Bringing it back more locally here, what they wanted to be able to do is for school districts that were struggling to improve, that were ranked a level 3, level 4 year over year over year, that the state or the commissioner could request the superintendent of schools and the school committee to offer a turnaround plan and to measure their success against their own plan year over year. And if that wasn't being achieved, then all of a sudden the state could come in and start providing extra resources, whether it be financial or managerial.
But Ryan, I'm going to be mean.
Yeah.
Some of these towns get 80% reimbursement.
Mm-hmm.
We're at 47.
Right.
How do they get more? You
That's
say
a great
give them extra
question.
resources, but they're already at 80%.
Well, they have a pool of what I've learned with Southbridge being taken over is there's a small pool of schools that are in receivership, first of all, and secondly, a small pool of money that is targeted for these schools in receivership to have extra programming. So instead of having, your typical school day from 7:30 in the morning to 2:30 in the afternoon, especially in populations that have, more ELL student population or below the poverty line, significantly below the poverty line, they extend that school day from 2:30 to as late as 6 o'clock at night. And part of that is additional education programming for kids where English is a second language and they're struggling maybe to learn the language and all the other things that come along with that. Another component is the social emotional, implementing more of those types of programs in these schools where that's more of a problem. We do that in the education bill that we passed. There's grants available. The governor has been putting forward grants year over year, which are really significant, especially in this day and age. But you're right, it's also a managerial thing. And being able to go in and say, this is perhaps a teacher, and I remember one that I had in high school that shouldn't be there. But getting rid of that individual can be very challenging, and it can bring down a whole class because they're not being effectively taught. Those are the types of tools that on accountability, year over year over year over year, where there wasn't any progress that could have been implemented that weren't found in this bill. So that's one of the disappointments. I have a bunch of regional school districts in my district. Mendon-Upton Regional, Shepherd Hill, which is Dudley, Charlton, sometimes Webster students go there as well, Southbridge too. But that school district and the district for Nipmuc, Mendon-Upton Regional, they didn't get 100% funding for regional schools. So put that in perspective, 1949 we create the regional school districts. Now there's about 173 districts. There has not been 1 year, with the exception of 1949, that we fully funded 100% regional school transportation. It's an $18 million a year cost, which is not a lot when you consider the fact we spend $5.5 billion in education. And it was a promise we made 60 years ago.
Yeah, but the problem I see with that is that most of the towns that have regional are small towns with
Right.
small budgets.
Mm-hmm.
So you hit when we did the BVT numbers. decade or so ago again.
Yeah.
We saw towns getting hit with an extra $100,000. But if your total budget is $3 million,
Yeah.
that 100,000 was an amazing number for them to come up with.
Right. Yep.
So, I become more sensitive when I think of these small towns. It may not be a lot of money. I mean, if Milford got hit with $1 million hit,
Yeah.
it would hurt.
Right.
But we'd adapt. We
Yeah.
just spent $700,000 last year adding our own little SWAT team
Yep.
to make sure that the kids were taken care of.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Well, one of the reasons why I ended up supporting this bill is you mentioned smaller towns. Some of the smaller towns in my hometown didn't make out great when it comes to the actual formula changes because, unless you have an increasing population, more enrollment, which we still have a per pupil enrollment formula, the benefit of this formula isn't great for you. Milford is one of the few school districts with increasing
but
enrollment.
this is the first time the last 2 years.
Yep.
Because as I mentioned before, Kevin McIntyre used to tease me when I said, you only get one new kid a year.
Yeah.
For the past, and when I graduated Milford High, 74, there was 220.
Right.
2 years ago, there was 268, so you're sitting there saying that's one kid.
Yeah.
But the last 2 years, we've banged over 100-some children.
Yep. Yeah, and that's an anomaly relative to our area. Our area has seen declining or stagnant enrollment. And, so the funding for that doesn't necessarily help. We tried to raise what is known as minimum school aid. So about 7 years ago, the state came up with a policy to hold harmless any school district that had decreasing enrollment. And they would hold harmless anybody that saw their population dwindle and not have the impact, adverse impact on Chapter 70 funding for education. So they would keep it flat. Or if in certain circumstances you qualified as a minimum school aid, so first of all, you have stagnant enrollment, you have the ability to get $30 additional per pupil. And that was always a practice over the last 7 years. It was now codified into law. So one thing that happens is, despite the fact that some of the enrollments are falling, no school is going to see a decrease that's now in the statute. The second thing is that public school transportation for special education being a part of this, being new, that's very large. So, a smaller district like Northbridge, they see maybe an additional $60,000 in the Chapter 70 funding formula, but they're going to see over $100,000 for the special education reimbursement annually, which is a pretty big deal. Sutton is a similar situation, $104,000.
Well, it's got to be about 12 years ago that we changed the way we dealt with the school budget. Because SPED has always been increasing. 1 year out of 13 or 14, it went down.
Yeah.
But we took the budget and said, Chapter 70 is nice, and we appreciate every dollar, but we're not going to count on it for school. We're going to do our budget, and we broke it up into the capital being a separate item, the SPED being a separate item. So we go to the school committee and say, tell us what you spent last year. What are you going to spend this year? And sometimes that's $600,000-700,000. 1 year was $800,000 above the year before. And we fund that separate. We take ELL and we fund that separate.
Yep.
So then that leaves the general operating budget, and we get to push them to say, stay within 2-point-something%.
Yep.
Now everybody knows they're not able to.
Right.
Because just the year we increased the capital for Woodland, $3 million, it would kill them.
Yeah.
Or the SPED. One thing I never wanted to see, or we never wanted to see as a FinCom, is SPED parents fighting typical parents over resources.
Right. Yeah.
So we've been pretty lucky in Milford that we've been able to take money, put it aside for ELL, SPED, which holds harmless the school, because you get 1 or 2 kids come in, and I mean, you're a father now and a father to be.
Yep.
How many times you say a prayer saying thank you for not making me have to rely on these resources?
Yeah. Yep.
But at the end of the day, we've got 4,400 kids in Milford. none of them, in my mind, are any more special or less special. You take care of them.
Right. Yeah.
Kids who want to play football, we built a football stadium. Kids who want to do softball, we built a softball field.
Mm-hmm.
Kids who need a little help, we helped the SPED group. They're all our kids.
Yeah. No, it's a great community, and you can see that. I was not too long ago at an event down at the Hoboken Club, and it was for the baseball team there, the Legion team, and they were talking about Pheno Field and trying to get upgrades for that. There's been a lot of improvements made. You can see it around town. One of the things that I've been working on is downtown revitalization.
Yeah, you
trying to
got us
make
more
that
money.
a destination. A few years ago, several people had reached out. Josh Leosh being one of them, who's on this redevelopment committee. And he said, hey, do you think the state has any resources available? I was able to get it into the budget, $150,000. I think the plan at the time was about $300,000 to spend annually. And the good news is they spent the first $75,000 this past spring, helping with the facades and some improvements. They weren't able to spend the next $75,000 because they got into some weather, which impacted the construction season. So when money is allocated in a fiscal year but not spent, it's called PAC money. It's previously authorized consideration, and so that will be happening probably in about a week or two, where the governor files a bill, includes that as part of an extension into the next fiscal year. So they'll have that additional $50 to make them $150,000 whole. And then I put in another $75,000 for the FY21 budget, FY20 budget. I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself in FY21. And just for the same thing, to build on the progress, to continue to beautify and make the Milford downtown area a place that's a destination where businesses can thrive and where people want to go down.
And we're starting to see interest in downtown again.
Yeah.
The biggest problem we've always had is parking.
Yep.
The 4 spaces downtown were usually full.
Right. Yeah.
But, now with the buildings we bought and the parking lot behind that we'll build, it's getting there.
Well, there's a cool story to be told. A lot of people don't know about Claflin Hill Orchestra statewide necessarily, but I talk a lot about them. I just actually put my check in the mail for season tickets again. I think I'll be sitting near you. And, my hope is that I'll be able to take the governor down this year. We had talked to him about it not too long ago in August and said, hey, you got to come down and experience this, because the downtown area is very walkable. You could go down to the town hall, have the show with the Claflin Hill, see Paul Serpine do his thing with his orchestra, and then walk down the street. And if you want to go to a pub, go to the Turtle Pub. If you want to go to a restaurant, I have the 75 there.
It all changes.
However you say the name. Places that you can walk to and eat, or just drive down the road a little bit. You go to the town of Mendon, and there's great options to enjoy food. So, there's a wonderful little story.
We like Mendon, but we don't want to tell anybody to leave Milford. We want to support all the Milford restaurants.
Yeah, absolutely. But New England Steak and Seafood and Alicante, they're pretty good.
They're staples of what we grew up with, but still.
Absolutely.
There's enough in Milford to keep you busy.
And there's a lot of Milford ties over there.
Oh, yeah.
They cross the border.
Now, Governor Baker took on the vaping issue.
Yeah.
And obviously we hear a lot about all the reasons for it.
Yeah.
But there's some concerns that nobody talks about.
Sure.
And I think you were one of them that raised your hand and said, hey guys, we got to really watch this.
Yeah, I'm concerned about it. I think you step back and you look at the statistics. I read there was about 1,080 people that have been affected with illness, hospitalized. And unfortunately today, the first person in Massachusetts passed away, which brings us up to about 19 total people who have lost their lives due to this vaping concern. And there's a lot of things that happen on a day-to-day basis that people do that are unsafe. They text and drive. They
smoke cigarettes.
They smoke cigarettes. They don't pay attention walking down the road. I'm one of those people sometimes. But the reality is you can't you can't legislate people's activity necessarily and what they will and will not do, irrespective of the law. And what I mean by that is almost 90% of all the vaping illnesses have been caused by THC-related products, at least according to some of the things I've read. And, you know, those THC products are highly regulated in Massachusetts due to the Massachusetts
But
marijuana
are they?
laws. But there's sort of this black market that exists
Yes.
as well. And there's a big problem that if you shut down the free market, all of a sudden you've opened up the black market because of people, like I was saying, you're not going to necessarily change people's behavior. If they want to vape, they're going to find a source to do that. And, you know, what I think Governor Baker has done, well, maybe his intentions were pure, has opened up access to this black market, driving demand there, which could have more significant consequences for people's health than perhaps just saying, you know, vaping is a problem. Perhaps we're going to look at THC products and shutting those down, and we'll avail tobacco products for now until we get figured out. But I also think, you know, the economics behind it, I know of at least 5 vaping shops, one in Webster, one in Sutton, one in Southbridge, one in Mendon, you know, that have, I think one in Douglas.
Are they going on vacation for the next 4 months?
One of them just told me that they've shut down because they're out of business. That happened yesterday. We got an email, I got it today, today's Monday. But the guy said, I'm closing because
I got nothing to sell.
I've got nothing to sell. And, you know, those people have families and they contribute to society. So, you know, you could just say, if we want to do everything by diktat, well, no one can have cell phones anymore because people die when they're driving on the road. Or,
I do remember many visits to a place that regulated almost everything you did, and how less than happy people were. It was called the Soviet Union.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know, there they decided they knew better, and they would tell you exactly how to behave, how to eat, how to think.
Yep.
And look what happened there. I
Yeah.
don't think any of us want that, but the whole term vaping, you know, as a chemist, I sit there and say vaping, vapor, water.
Yeah.
This is not vaping.
Right.
And number
It's
two,
good marketing.
yeah, that's exactly what it is, because you think about the heavy metal contamination people are finding.
Right.
Well, it makes more sense now that you got a metal element that you're superheating, and you're breathing it.
Yeah.
Why would you not think there's going to be downside to that?
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think it's a legitimate conversation that's been had over the course of the last year, but I don't think to the extent of what just happened with the governor's executive order. And, you know, the governor is typically a pretty cautious person.
Yeah.
So the fact that he did it, and I haven't had a chance to talk to him about it, I really don't know why he did it outside of the public health sphere of concern. But, you know, he tends to be cautious, and he wasn't on this. I tend to be pretty cautious, and I wouldn't have done this. I would have taken a little bit of a different direction, mostly because I'd be so afraid to drive more demand into the black market.
I have less of an issue for people driving to New Hampshire or Rhode Island, because it's like, I have no data, but I believe a lot of the decline in smoking, it's too hard.
Yeah.
You know,
Inexpensive.
you can't, well, inexpensive, but you can't smoke in your office, you can't smoke in a building, you can't smoke. I mean, that just cuts it down by the effort it takes.
Yeah. Yep.
But at least if they were driving over the border, then you sit there and say they're buying regulated or semi-regulated products.
Yeah.
When they buy it from Joe, the street urchin, who knows what's in it? There's no regulations at all.
Yep.
And you know, I worry when I think about some of the additives, you know, when you start thinking of some of the phthalates and everything they throw in there to keep it moist or whatever, that stuff's not good to breathe.
Yeah. Yeah, no, not at all. Speaking of public health, you know, tomorrow I'm coming to town with the district attorney, likely Brian Murray, the state rep, and Amy Leone, and we're unveiling the news that Milford has
Got a
received
grant?
$1 million to address
Thank you.
opioid and substance abuse addiction, which is fantastic. You know, that's been a real problem in this town, as it has been everywhere. And, you know, the fact that we get to, it's a federal grant, you know, and the district attorney and Amy Leone drove that grant to success, which was fantastic. Of course, we always write letters saying, you know, I have a lot of faith in Amy and what she does, and endorse, you know,
but
those
there's got
types
to be
of
such a difference. Amy's out there begging, scratching for $1 here, $1 there to
Yeah.
keep her program going.
Right.
This is one heck of a
It's a lot of money.
compliment to her work.
It is. It is. And she's revered. A lot of people seek her guidance on these topics, including myself. And yet, she's down. You listen to the personal stories I've heard about her, being away on vacation and stepping away from her family to take a phone call to either assist somebody who's in need, or the unfortunate part of having to be on the phone with a family member who lost a loved one, and then willingness to fly back, and interrupt their vacation. It's just, she's an amazing person.
What else is new and exciting on the Hill?
There's a lot of things. Some of it's exciting, some of it's boring. One of the exciting things, I think the governor has filed this bill, which I think would impact a lot of people in my district, which I think is really good. As you probably have followed, we've had a lot of good budgetary news. With $1 billion surplus. We had 1 month where projected revenues were $400 million above what they were supposed to be in April. And, that's a state that is looking at a lot of economic prosperity. And at some point, you have to stop and say, okay, well as we're doing and as projections of revenue are up, this isn't our money.
Right.
It's the people's money. And so shouldn't we offer to give some of that back because they're the ones paying the bills? So the governor has put forward I think a really decent proposal, which would increase, double the exemption or the write-off for dependents. So if you have a dependent, you currently can write off $1,000, which is fine. He wants to move that to $2,000. This hasn't changed in over 20 years, but costs have certainly gone up. And it would impact 1.3 million filers in Massachusetts, many of whom live in my district. And it's not just people who have children, but it's also somebody who has a dependent mom or dad or loved one that they're taking care of. And, that they may need a little extra help and a little bit extra money in their pocket. So I think that that's something that is a really beneficial thing. And it kind of serves purpose to that philosophy of it's the people's money. And, we should once in a while think about not what programs we're going to necessarily fund, but giving them their money back.
Well, that's always been an issue we have. Luckily, thank you, Lord, for giving us the problem of, this year, 14 years in a row, $4.7 million surplus.
Yep.
And you sit there and say, well, what do you do with $4.7 million? Well, half of it you give back.
Right.
And I hate to use the words give back because it just means we took too much.
Right. Yep.
It's not our money. I joke, I buy my coffee.
Yeah.
I worked, I earned that money. I can spend the $3 on a cup of coffee.
Yeah.
But before I spend your $3.
Right. Well, I always find April, May, June, July kind of an interesting time period because people get so excited. They're getting their tax refunds back. And, they think this is the world's best thing. And my wife and I were talking. I said, Steph, we paid too much in taxes. That's why we're getting money back. You gave
the federal government an interest-free loan.
They're just giving us our money back,
right.
And so it is one way of looking at it. Speaking of my wife has been doing some pretty good work that I'm happy to brag about here. My wife's the Register of Probate for Worcester County, which includes Milford, 60 cities and towns. She always reminds me, that I'm outranked. 14? Yes, I'm outranked. But there was a few weeks ago some news out there that there had been some people coming from other states that had changed their name who happened to be sex offenders. And the way you change your name is you go to the courthouse locally, Worcester County, and you go to the Register of Probate, and you file for a name change. Well, if you're from another state, a lot of times they don't do background checks on the individual, and if you come from another state and you're a sex offender, it's incumbent upon you to let them know to the Sex Offender Registry Board and to your local community that, oh, by the way, I'm a sex offender. Well, if that doesn't happen, you can change your name and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. So my wife has implemented a policy in Worcester County, which is the first one statewide, that every single name change, irrespective of whether you're from Massachusetts or moving in to the state, that you have a background check to make sure, and they check with the Sex Offender Registry Board to make sure that you're flagged and that if you are a sex offender, that the local towns are notified of that change and that the new name is posted.
Stephanie.
Which is fantastic, and part of it comes from we've got 2 young children with a third on the way.
But again, if I'm changing my name and I have nothing to hide, I don't care if you do you can do a background check. What you're going to find is boring, more boring, and boring on top of that.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So why would I worry that Miss Stephanie is checking on me?
Right.
God bless you. Check all you want.
Yep. Yeah, it's a public safety.
It's fantastic. I'd love to keep going, but I promised to get you out of here.
Well, thank you.
So you could go to another town.
I am, yeah, my hometown, Sutton. We have this annual thing that goes on every Christmas time, and I was asked to come and speak because I've done it now for, I believe, almost 20 years in a row, which is kind of scary. I was 16 when I first started volunteering. And so this will be my 20th year, and I am asked to get the volunteers all ginned up for when they drive around the town in a trolley and tell people about what's going on the first Saturday in December. So,
well, that's wonderful that you're keeping traditions going.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
And we'll get you back soon so
Sounds
we can
great.
continue this. As always, sorry to cut the show short, but Sutton has a tradition, and we have to honor and admire that they've kept this tradition going for their own people, just like we have ours. So to our 6 loyal viewers, may God bless. May tomorrow be a better day than tonight. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, Al.
Not too long since I've been home, been running all my life just